different perspectives from various segments of the industry. I'd like you to please say hello when I introduce you. So we're joined by Chiara Pacella, who is the lead in language management at Facebook. Her responsibilities cover localization and internationalization, linguist quality assurance, vendor management and training. Today, she's logging in from Dublin in Ireland, and she's adept in 5 languages: Italian, French, English, Spanish and Portuguese, though German may be soon added to that list as her children attend a German school. Chiara?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Aminda. I'm glad and honored to be part of this panel today, and I look forward to expressing my view around what challenges digital platforms are bringing into the localization, internationalization, and translation worlds. I think you said it all about my experience. I've been both on the vendor side and on the client side for the last almost 2 decades in the localization industry. Most of my professional life has been on the client side, so I will probably give a deeper view of that aspect. I look forward to sharing my takeaways today.
Thank you. We're also joined by Anchal, who is the co-founder and COO at Nativy, Translations. This online agency offers professional translation, copywriting and SEO services in more than 500 language combinations and 53 subject areas. She's logging on today from Vienna in Austria, and she speaks 4 languages fluently: English, German, French and Hindi. Anchal?
Hello, thanks for having me. As Aminda mentioned, I run operations at Nativy, which is an online translation agency, and we're a platform that has automized the entire process flow around ordering and managing translations. Let's say for us, it's not just important to automate and make the life of the client easier, but just as much for the translator, and that's something that I'll also be sharing today. Thank you. Amanda, we can't hear you.
So you can't hear me. Now you can hear me again. Thank you for warning me. There are so many buttons, sometimes you forget which one is your microphone and which not. Excuse me. The next person we have is Norma Keßler, who is the president of BDU, which is the German Federal Association of Interpreters and Translators. It has around 8,000 members, 80% of whom are freelancers. She's logging in from a city near Frankfurt in the Bavaria region of Germany, and she knows 3 languages: German, English and Spanish. Norma?
Yeah, thank you, Aminda. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Well, there's nothing more to add, except that we as a BDU are part of the FIT family, the International Organization of Translators, and we are part of the FIT Europe, which is quite important in this area. And we were close together to cope with all the things that come up and with the platforms. I'm really interested in how things are going today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And last but not least, we have Jos Moorkens, who's member of the board of the European Masters in Translation Network. And he's also an assistant professor at the School of Applied Language and Intercultural Studies at Dublin City University. He's also joining us from the Irish capital, Dublin, like Chiara, and he speaks German, Japanese and English, and he also knows some Finnish as it's spoken at home. Jos?
Hi, Aminda. Thank you very much for inviting me along. I'm looking forward to the discussion this afternoon.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And of course, once the discussions have started flowing, we'll then go to your questions. So please do send them in and also vote on the ones that you like, because we'll be going for the ones with the top votes first. And we'll be putting them shortly in the middle of the session and then also at the end. So let's begin by hearing each of our speakers' experiences with platforms and translation, considering the following question. How do platforms and the digital ecosystems they create affect the work of translators and the translation needs of clients? Chiara Pacella, I think everybody listening, of course, has come across your platform, correct? So I think I'd like you to start our discussions.
Of course. Today I actually would like to address the questions that this forum will be trying to answer today and tomorrow by looking at them from the point of view of a client of translation and localization services, and more specifically a company, as you said, that has been at the earth of digital transformation for over a dozen years. So my goal is to illustrate the challenges that the industry has to address in order to enable the translation profession to adapt to this ever-changing environment where things don't stop and they keep moving faster and faster, and content is produced at an unprecedented pace, and a process that may work today may not be working anymore tomorrow. So what do clients need today? Well, it's the usual stuff, right? Quality, fast and timely delivery, value for money. We may say, this is not big change compared to what it was like before in the pre-digital world. But in addition to this usual stuff, we actually need to be able to trust as clients that our products feel local at a global scale. So we need to be sure that the linguistic experts that we work with are trained, and that the skill it takes to understand cultural nuances, to point out to us when our language, our products, our features do not resonate in their culture, when we're imposing a view to the world that is heavily permeated by a dominating culture, usually the American culture, usually American-centric content. So what does this translate into? Well, I see two main aspects. So one is the client responsibility towards linguists, and the linguists need to push their boundaries and to get out of the comfort zone and embrace a new job that goes beyond translation. So those are the two aspects that I would like to dig in a little bit more in the next few minutes. So first of all, clients need to invest in education, internal and external education. Internally, there is a lot of upstreaming work to be done within a company. Localization and internationalization team have to be everywhere within a company that creates global experiences. They are responsible to educate product teams, content designers, content writers, whatever you want to call them, engineers, about what it means to build a product and write content that is ready to be internationalized. Translation may well still be one of the last steps. And I say one of the last steps because to me should never be the very last step. But no matter what, localization is not. Designing a product for an international audience is actually the very first step. Thinking international is the very first step. This involves a series of efforts, such as having localization experts embedded into product teams to evangelize about best practices, establishing and maintaining a close cross-functional relationship with content teams, making sure that they understand the importance of prep work, such as terminology, providing context to translators, not just content. And this context can be in the form of content brief, translation briefs. I mean, every company may have different names, visuals, run-through of a product or feature that has to be internationalized. I like to spend a few words on terminology specifically, because I think what is vital is that this is work that has to be done before any translation work kicks off, and there are implications in not doing so. It is important also when it comes to terminology in the digital world to shift from, and also in the evangelization of content and product teams, to shift from teaching about terms and to start making sure that writers think about concepts rather than terms. Oftentimes I'm asked, or one of my team members is asked, does this term localize? And that always leaves me a little bit baffled, because okay, it's probably a bit arguable, but you could say that everything localizes, but every term, you can localize almost everything, but if you think about the concept, not about the term. So I think it's very important to, when a product team or a content writer explores naming options for a new feature, so what should I call this? Is this going to work when internationalized? It's important that they think about the concept, not about the term itself. And when it comes to collateral materials that I mentioned earlier, so ideally this is preparation work that comes at the same time as term work. And I know I'm very well aware that in the real world this is often not possible, because one aspect of digital platforms is that content is never final. So basically changes happen until launch or even after launch. And basically, you never have stable content, and this is super challenging for translators, because they may not know until the very last moment what they're about to translate. So when it comes to providing context to them, I think one thing that clients can and should do is forget about static documents. So forget about providing a PDF with images to a translator. I mean, that still can be useful, but think living, breathing documents, like embed them into your content management systems, give translators access to them, and have content teams work on them at the same time as they produce content. And also think about the environment that translators work in. Oftentimes they translate decontextualized context. They don't know when the content is going to appear. The tools that they use may be industry tools, may be proprietary tools, may be customized industry tools. But if content writers don't know what this tool looks like, don't know what translators see when they see our interfaces, they basically cannot create content that is ready to be internationalized. So there's a lot we can do to better educate writers so that content is actually ready to be internationalized when it gets to our linguists. Oh, now, sorry.
Chiara, I think I'm going to stop you there, because I would like to hear some of the other panelists, and we can come back and you can we can hear a little bit more later on. Interesting stuff. I like the idea of having to push boundaries and the fact that the clients really have to get involved in internal education. Very interesting. So I'd like to turn to you, Anchal LOCHAN, now. You have a very different kind of experience with Nativy translations, which itself is a platform. So how does that platform affect the work of translators and also the translation needs of clients?
Thanks, Aminda. So, Chiara talked about platform as client, right? So Facebook is a client of translation, needing translation services. We're a platform that's an enabler. So we're a space where clients can come and order translations, and we made it our mission to automate the entire process flow around ordering and managing human translations. So very quickly, a client that comes to our platform can upload a document or send us content via their API and would see instantaneously quotes on price and delivery. We also show quotes that includes the names and pictures of translators, so the client knows exactly who they're ordering, and they can place the order in 2 clicks, just the way they would book a hotel room online or buy a flight. So that's on the translators, on the client side. It was also very important to us to make the life and work of translators easier. As Chiara mentioned, she talked about how important prep work is, and I just want to use that as a jumping off point to say that translators need to spend time translating. and not waste it in administrative work. And that's what we've tried to enable through our platform. So for instance, translators enter their own rates and update their schedules on our platform. And whenever they receive a job from us, it's as per the data they've entered. So we in short try to make it easier for translators to do what they do best, which is translating.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And now Norma Keßler from the BDU, Association of Interpreters and Translators. How are your members affected by platforms? Microphone, we can't hear you.
Sorry, forgot that. From the time of the typewriter, translators had to adopt new technologies, and now it's the platforms. They have procurement platforms where clients order the translations, and they have, as we heard from the agencies, they have to use platforms. But what's coming now are the translation platforms that really do the translation. And we have to be aware of the fact that you still need the human factor within translation. And this is my point today, that we need to tell clients that the human translator is so important in this process. You can do gisting with automated translation, but you can't have a high quality translation. As Anchal said, you have to have the expertise of a translator. So this is our experience with platforms.
Okay, interesting actually, and it ties into something that was a discussion that was happening in the audience in the opening session, where people were talking about machine translation, and they were worried that it would completely eventually cut out human translation altogether. And a lot of people in the platform were saying that they definitely think human translation will be around for a long time, if not forever. But I'm sure we'll possibly explore that a little bit more. But Jos Moorkens, I'd like to hear from you now, and also about how EMT students are being prepared for the world of platforms.
Well, first of all, from my perspective, I think what I'm most interested in to do with platforms, particularly ones that are being used by professional translators, is accentuating the positive effects, the fact that they can streamline things, that they can orchestrate the matching that Simon Torrance was talking about earlier, and he mentioned enabling producers to succeed. So not to accentuate the disparities of power that are currently existent in the translation industry, where freelance translators aren't necessarily in the strongest position to assert their power. So I'm mostly concerned with the sustainability of the industry, and but the fact that they don't try to increase existing disparities of power. So while I generally am very positive about technology, and certainly wouldn't be would see the need to be competitive, I'm concerned about things such as data gathering within translation platforms, usability, and whether they increase isolation and depersonalization. I don't know that there's anything very specific that we do within the EMT, other than we try to make sure that translators are very aware about how technology works, and try and teach them to be critical about their sources, and not to assume that any source or reference or machine translation will be of a certain quality, and to be able to speak knowledgeably about why machine translation might be useful in some circumstances and not in others. Of course, a platform doesn't necessarily need to incorporate machine translation, but that's one of the main technology focuses of translators' lives today, and certainly it's something that's come up in our short discussion with Norma beforehand.
Indeed. Before I go to some audience questions, is there anyone in the panel that wants to react to what anyone else has said and they want to take things a bit further? Anchal? And then Chiara?
Yes, I just wanted to respond to something that Josh just said about disparities of power. That we as a platform, one thing that's been very important to us is to try to disrupt these power dynamics that exist. And one way we do that is by putting the translator and client in direct contact. So, starting from the time when the order is being placed, the client can choose their translator. They see who they're ordering. They can by name. And then in the translation process, they can directly communicate with each other. And we found that this transparency really leads to higher quality translations, leads to greater client satisfaction, translator satisfaction. And so I just wanted to say that, platforms like ours can also serve as a humanizing element in what is otherwise very opaque a translation process. And that's something we've tried to do.
Thank you. And in fact, I'm sure maybe Joss will want to come back on that in a minute, but Chiara?
Yeah, so my intervention actually was on a different topic, which was the fact that what can universities, what can training bodies do to enable translators to live and be successful in this new environment. So for me, one key aspect is to switching from training translators to training linguists. I don't know if you know this, but earlier I think I barely used the word translator. I prefer to use this the word linguist, or there are many other terms that have popped up in recent years to define the translation profession. This is a reflection of what I said earlier. Digital transformation has brought a need to create products that feel local at a global scale, which also means being able for people translating this in the broader sense, translating these products for the culture, to think about the cultures, not only about the language. So I think one aspect, the role that can be played by training bodies is to stop training translators, and not stop training translators, is to train more than translators, but linguists, people able to think beyond the pure linguistic aspect and have a broader approach at the profession.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Joss, I don't know if you want to come in on that.
Yeah, certainly. We tend to use the term translators. That's the people don't go to our universities to for a linguist degree, but we don't see it as a limiting term, and we very much focus on the importance of lifelong learning within the EMT network, and try to bridge the gap between academia and industry. So, for example, by having simulated translation bureaus, whereby translators would have their own sort of model companies that do simulated tasks, and by having a large-scale program of work placements and internships. But there were a couple of other things that cropped up from what other people were saying. Anchal was speaking about the importance of having that communication, because it's very common within the translation industry to have a very linear translation production network. The work of someone like Christina Abdallah in Finland has talked about the difficulty of trying to communicate a message from one end of that linear network to another. So being able to enable that communication is very important. And she also mentioned streamlining the process to allow translators or linguists to actually translate more. And in a research that's ongoing in the University of Bristol by Valentina Ragni and Lucas Nunes Vieira, they've found that the people they're interviewing to do with platforms specifically are only spending at around 20% of their time translating, and they would much prefer it to be much longer. And it's something we find, if you look through the list of competences that we try to focus on within the EMT network, there are so many other things that are important for translators to be able to do other than just translating. But it is the thing that they would like to spend more time doing. So if a platform can enable that, such as Nativy or others, well, that's great. One other thing that Chiara mentioned is her linguists having ownership of their projects, which is something that's really important. And the focus on technology could lead to us looking away from the things that are important from someone in their work. So it's not enough to just get paid well. What's important is having sort of an intrinsic sense of satisfaction, a sense of achievement, a sense of recognition for achievement, of responsibility and growth and advancement within a work. So if someone is working within a very limited platform that hasn't been built for them, and has very little say in what they're doing, then they're not going to feel that sense of ownership. It's already a problem in agile production networks. Chiara was talking about projects that never end. The source text is constantly being amended. So, at the moment, it doesn't mean that a translator now has a physical product they can hold in their hand at the end of a project. Instead, it'll be an agile production, and then after 2 weeks they might have to adjust sections of a text. So trying to focus on the ways to satisfy everyone within the network, all stakeholders, translators, and all the other people involved, is really important. So trying to have that sort of balance, I think, is something that we need to keep a focus on.
Okay, great. Chiara, I'm going to come to you in a moment, but I think I'd like to do some questions from the floor. I think there's quite a lot coming along. At the moment, we have the top voted one, which has 19 votes from Carmen. And it says, new remote work translator interpreter skills are now required in the context of the COVID pandemic. How should university curricula change so as to adapt efficiently to this situation? So, Jos, I think that's obviously addressed to you, but I think, Norma, you've got some things to add to this as well.
Well, I'll try and speak very little because I feel like I've spoken too much so far, but freelance translators mostly work, or about 70% of translators appear to work on a freelance basis and mostly work remotely anyway. So of all industries, it's probably the least disruptive. It's disruptive in other ways because, suppliers and clients and agencies are having their own pressing issues. But in terms of this remote work dynamic for translation, I don't think it makes as much of a difference. We're having to adapt our curricula to teach online, but that's a whole different matter.
Okay, thank you. And thanks to the 20 people who voted for that question. Norma?
So, yes, what we would like to have universities to teach young people is some kind of entrepreneurship, because you have to make your living on translation, on interpreting, and not to feel that you have to compete with automatic services whatsoever. So you have to know what you have to earn per hour, and how does this fit in your price scheme. So I think this is very important to teach young people, because we see that translators tend to not calculate their hours and the rates they should ask from clients to make a decent living.
Okay, thank you. In fact, that's interesting. It's hard to calculate your figures. It's not easy. And particularly nowadays where, for example, this question was about skills on new platforms and everything for interpreters. And people are spending a lot of time having to learn and research how these platforms work and practice and rehearse. And so, yes, and it's difficult to count those hours in, also because clients may not understand that work. So, yes, interesting question. Thank you. And we're now going to go to a question for Chiara. It says, you referred to in-house translators working at Facebook. What model do you apply at Facebook for combining human translation and machine translation?
Interesting. Yeah, actually, no, I was not referring to in-house translators working at Facebook. So our model actually has very few internal linguists, and virtually no internal translation is done. We collaborate with a lot of partners. Actually, I like to underline here, I use the word partners in relation to what I said earlier, that we really want to enable translators to do their job as best as we can. So we don't consider them as mere translation like service providers, but really as our partners. So I was referring mostly to external translators. As you can imagine, this poses a lot of challenges because they naturally don't have access to everything that we have access to internally, but they do have access to our products. We can kind of use workarounds to give them access to versions of our products before launch, of course. And I think this is the route that we usually take to make sure that they know what they're translating before it gets to them, before it gets out. In terms of, so I see this question as the second part was about combining human translation and machine translation. So here again, you might be surprised again that I was talking almost exclusively about human translation. So I think in the general public there is a little bit of confusion around how Facebook currently. So what you see on Facebook, what is human translation versus what is machine translation? Many of you are familiar with the automatic translation feature for user-generated content. So when you see a post from a friend, nowadays you actually automatically see it in the language that you have set your interface to, or one of the languages that you usually use on the interface, and you can actually see the original and even evaluate the translation. So that clearly is machine translation. I mean, I think it's relatively clear to everybody that it's machine translation. While most of our, virtually all of the content on our interface is humanly translated. So all the part that I my previous speech where I talked about enabling translators to do their job as best as they can by providing context, by building the partnership, is as to do exclusively with human translation. So we consider them as two entirely separated packets, and we treat user-generated content in a totally different way from our interfaces on product.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. We have another question here, always a vexed question, talking about fees and rates. So the question has been sent in by Solène, and we have 13 people who have voted for it. And it says, how can fair rates be guaranteed in this context? My experience is that the bigger the company and the platform, the more linguists are asked to do, but for low rates. How can one keep up with this and thrive? Who wants to take that one on? Anchal, would you like to?
Sure, I can. Well, I guess Norma would have something to say here. But from the platform side, I would just say that our experience is that quality trumps everything. So, my direct answer to that question would be, put your foot down, right? Like, don't cave in. Do not continue to work for that platform if they're engaging in price dumping. And our philosophy as a platform, as opposed to, let's say, these kinds of platforms that engage in price dumping, has been to say, okay, every translator sets their own rate. So every translator at Nativy is asked to put in what they want to charge for translation, what they want to charge for proofreading, per word, and they only and clients are shown quotes based on these prices. And clients can also see, not just the name, they can see a little blurb about the person. So they can see, okay, this person has been translating for 20 years, and has a degree, and has a law degree, and for that reason, they would be willing to pay a higher rate for their expertise. So my 2 cents there is simply to say, don't work for such platforms. Come to us. Put in your rate and get jobs only at what is the correct wage for your work.
And in fact, while you're on, there's a question specifically for you. And the question is, if clients can directly contact the translator, is it still necessary to have project managers within the business platform in that model? And who would be responsible to monitor the whole process? So how does that work?
Yes. So I think the project managers at Nativy, project managers are also key. So of course, part of the project management is done by the software, right? So starting from the time when the client wants to know, okay, here's my text. What is it going to cost? When am I going to get it? The software tells them that. They upload it or they send it through API, and they see in 2 seconds a quote and can place the order. So we find that the software needs to aid the project managers in the project management process. The direct contact between translators and clients is really mainly for content-related questions. So when the translator wants to clarify anything about the translation process, about how to localize a term, anything around that's where the client would come in. But everything else really would go to the project manager. So we still see the project manager aided by the software as key to this process. I mean, for us, the software also does things like remind you when you have an upcoming deadline. So we show translators all of their 4 deadlines, because at Nativy we have, let's say, a 5-step translation process. So the software would show you when what is due. So I feel like it's both parties.
Okay, thank you, Joss.
In response to your previous question, I might just suggest that it's very important that a platform tries to have more than just to create a transactional relationship between the producer or a translator or a linguist, whatever term we're using, and the person buying the translation and the intermediary, so that that there's actually some sort of trust that's developed, and if it's a company or an agency that's selling translation services based on quality with building long-term relationships, then there's likely to be a bit more trust, but also probably better payment terms and a long-term relationship building up, as opposed to someone who has a vendor manager who changes every couple of months, or when there's lights out project management and there's no real contact being made at all, in which case then the relationship is really just transactional, and I don't think that's likely to be particularly satisfying on a personal level. It's not likely to produce best quality from the translators, and is not, those sort of companies are probably less likely to pay particularly well. So trying to negotiate that building of trust for a platform is something that's probably quite tricky. There's been suggestions of using distributed ledgers such as Bitcoin for it, but obviously Anchal has a way of doing that to try and sort of personalize that relationship and enable it. But it's something that the platform providers are going to have to try and manage.
Okay, thank you. Now we've got a question for all, and I do want to then also move on to a little bit about the challenges and opportunities in a moment, but since we've got so many questions, let's try and answer them. This one's from Thomas. It's got 4 votes, and it's for everyone. And it says, talking about spending more time on the actual translation, doesn't it seem counterproductive that every single agency creates their own platform and tools, which translators now have to get familiar with in tutorials and the likes? Anchal?
short answer to that is
Microphone.
that, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, great. Is that the platform really ought to be really intuitive. So if you come to Nativy, you don't need a tutorial to be able to place an order or to be able to use our platform. And I think that if you need a tutorial, that it's a poorly made platform. It's got to be intuitive. So our approach to that is, hey, you shouldn't need to have to learn it. And I don't think you have to. If you go and check out our platform, you'd see.
Okay, thank you. And the one more question. Okay, Norma, you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to this last question. Once you concentrate...
Microphone?
Yes, it's open. Open?
Norma, we can't hear you.
Yeah.
I can hear her.
Yeah.
Okay. It's open? No? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Coming back to this question, and this fits into this to the platform question, is that once you only concentrate on the price and the lowest price, it doesn't make sense to learn 1,000 of different platforms. But once you see a platform that works for you and that gives you a good price, it's worth the time getting to know this platform. Okay,
thank you. Jos?
In the CSA research survey that was published in January, of about 6,000 respondents, 89% said that they regularly use portals, so portal versus platforms, and their differentiation was a little bit different. So they didn't refer specifically to online computer-assisted translation platforms, but it did seem that these platform models are really prevalent, and on average, the translators said they had to work with 5 different platforms or portals. And my concern there is that there's been leaps and bounds made in terms of usability for translation within platforms, particularly probably since the advent of MemoQ in the late 2000s, because they were very responsive to their customers' requests, and they had fast iterations of new versions, and a lot of the other platforms or translation developers, they stepped up as well. Plus, there's been a lot of research in terms of translation platforms or translation interaction, what works best, how best to present machine translation if you are presenting it, or most recently in the PhD of Samuel Loiby last week, where he, having the left to right presentation or the vertical presentation of matches. So there's been lots of work done. And if all these platforms are being developed, quite quickly and are all different to each other, the shortcut buttons aren't going to work. Translators tend to use shortcuts on keyboards rather than using or using the mouse. And, all of that prior knowledge, there's a danger of it being lost. So usability needs to be a real focus for this interaction. And judging by some of those responses to the CSA research survey, it's not always the case that there's vast differences in terms of usability. And that, again, puts the producer or translator or linguist at a disadvantage.
Okay, thank you. I've got one more question, so let's go to that. It's good quality is not just the result of selecting a translator by name, but really breeding your freelance pool by providing feedback, organizing trainings, and that type of thing. This is from Francoise. A number of people voted on this. Does anyone want to come in on that? Anchal?
Yeah, I feel like it's directed to something I said. So yes, very, very much so. It's not about selecting a translator by name. So I can tell you a little bit about how we do quality control at Nativy. We have a 5-step process. In the first step, the translator does the translation. In the second step, the proofreader proofreads the translation. In the third step, they have to fill in a mandatory feedback form on 6 different criteria, including grammar, terminology, style, formatting, etc. And if the translation receives low marks on any of these criteria, the order is automatically locked, and a third person, independent translator, comes in to look at what exactly was going on here. Was someone just having a bad day and gave the translation low marks, or is there something really legitimate that's going on here? In the fourth step, the translator and the proofreader are in direct contact again, along with the client, but that's also possible between the translator and the proofreader, where they discuss all the points that they did not agree upon. And in the fifth step, after this translation process, the translator reviews everything and prepares the final version, which is then delivered to the client. So this is what we understand under quality control, and that's something that's aided, and that the translators really appreciate, having this feedback from the proofreader and being able to give their feedback to the translator, which exactly fosters the kind of interaction that the translators want. So yeah, and then finally, to the point of picking someone by name, well, we build a team of preferred translators per client. So every client has their team of 6 linguist translators that they regularly work with and they like, and they know them by name too. So they might say, okay, I really enjoy Nicola's marketing copy, and I would like to work with Nicola again. And so being able to select someone by name is just another way of really personalizing the experience and saying, okay, these are my 3 people, and I know them, and I'm going to pick them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Chiara, you wanted to come in?
Well, yes, I just wanted to comment that I agree with the view and the idea. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so it looks like I'm in the... Okay. So yes, no, I just wanted to comment that I think the question is totally justified. Anchal kind of explained what's behind, what was behind the statement, so that totally makes sense. But for me, from a client perspective, again, since that's the perspective I'm representing today, I wanted to stress how it is vital for the client to establish a partnership with their linguist service providers. In some cases, it's easier when there's no middleman, so when working directly with translators. In some cases, there may be an SLV working for an MLV working for the client, so there's multiple steps to take before that relationship can be established. But I think one important aspect is creating a link that lasts and not switching. Having translator become someone you can trust and partners you can go to, and not just service providers, as I said earlier. So I think that's the important aspect.
Okay, Norma?
Yeah, I would like to highlight this, and this is a task for the translator, him or herself, to build up a relationship to his or her clients. If you have these SMEs in your region, you can go to them, you can visit them. So this is important to be personally the point of contact for translation.
Thank you.
And actually, sorry, yes, no, now I remember what I wanted to say was in relation to something that Norma said earlier around translators at some point will develop skills to understand when it's worth investing in learning a new tool. This was in relation to the question around, is it worth learning to use 5, 6, 7 different tools depending on the needs of the clients. I totally agree with Norma around the fact that translators over time will develop a sensibility. It may not be easier for new translators that are new to industry, but at some point they will develop an understanding of when it's worth investing. Is this client showing me that they want to invest in me, that they want to build a relationship with me? If they do, then are they, for example, paying for my training? Are those hours being paid for? if yes, this means that the clients want to really make sure that I understand their tools or the third-party tools that they've had customized for their needs, and that I know the features and that I can provide feedback on it. This is also, I think Joss mentioned something around MemoQ being very flexible to the client's needs. And I think that's very important for creators of tools to give this option to clients and translators. So yeah, over time, translators will need to develop this skill of understanding, is this client asking me to establish this partnership or not?
Okay, thank you. We've got a few comments that aren't necessarily questions, but they've been getting a lot of votes, so I'm going to mention them anyway. Anna sent in something that's been voted by 9 people, and she says, a very important message from Jos MOORKENS: translator or linguist should also feel what they do is rewarding, that they are developing, not just as a cog in a big machine. That's probably one of the reasons why many translators hate post-editing. I don't think we need any comments on that, but I just wanted to pass that on. There's quite a lot of questions about university curricula and training. So one of them is saying, how can university curricula change? Are the providers of distance translation interpretation services ready to cooperate with universities and be part of the changes? And there was one more that was related to training that I'd like to try and find again, which has gone down. Here we go. Here's an adjusting to the cultural context is actually a very important part of translation education. Should non-translating stakeholders also train on how to work and communicate with translators? Okay, we'll start with you, Chiara, and then Jos, and then if either of the other two want to jump in, just let me know.
Yeah, I think this is an excellent question, and I'd like to link it to the question that was asked earlier around whether project managers are still needed. So my first reaction to the question was not only they're still needed, but just as it's happening for the translation profession, the project management profession has to evolve as well, and is evolving as well. In fact, as a matter of fact, we don't call project managers anymore at Facebook. So we changed the label that we use for them, because indeed it is vital for them to understand not only the technical aspects of passing files, like that part has passed. It's going to be automated more and more, and in some cases it's probably already 100% automated, but that human component will always be there, and non-linguists, such as figures such as project managers, let's keep calling them project managers for the moment, will have to understand how to link the external professionals they work with internal stakeholders, and educate on one side, so on the external side, what's been discussed internally within the limits of what can be shared for privacy, confidentiality, and all that, and on the other side, iterate back to the internal stakeholders that they work with, product teams, content writers, around the needs of the translators. So I think, yeah, it is vital for non-translating professionals in this landscape to be aware of all the other actors' needs and requirements in the picture.
Okay, Jos, did you come in on that university education and the curriculum?
Yeah, certainly. For speaking for my own university in Dublin, but also I was reviewing the applicants for the new EMT intake last year, and I think that university programs, certainly the ones in EMT, work very closely with industry and are constantly updating their teaching to make sure that it's on point for what's required and what's going on at present. There's a lot of interaction. There's a lot of people from industry who come in and give talks to students, who take them on for internships and interact in in different ways, maybe, providing some texts for translation or even marking some translation. So there's a lot of very tight interaction. And I would think in general that teaching is very responsive to what's going on in industry, to any changes.
Okay, thank you. There's one question that, someone made a comment, and I'm just trying to find it again. There's so many questions coming in, they keep scrolling up and down. It's a bit like trying to catch a slippery fish. Who was this? This was Alessandro. He says, and 5 people agree with him, I totally agree with Chiara Pacella and the necessity for linguists to go beyond their comfort zone and mere translation, but how to properly involve linguists upstream in localization projects in contexts where there are no in-house translators. That's quite a big, complicated question. Chiara, obviously, you may have some ideas. Anybody else want to answer this question as well? Okay, we'll start with you, Chiara, and if anyone else wants to jump in, just let me know.
Sure. So there are many things that can be done. None of them is easy, and none of them can be done by everyone. We were talking about this in the panel, actually, before opening up to the world, not all clients will have the resources to do such things. So the best thing you can do is to gather linguists together once a year, once every 6 months, organize some sort of summit, present upcoming products, present what's in store, let them meet physically, not during the pandemic, but when possible, physically, the content writers, content designers, let them understand how it is to be inside the company and creating those products. But as I said, not every company can afford to do that. Now, and especially with COVID, we've learned to do a lot of this remotely. So I think we will be able to leverage a lot of things that we've been learning during this very difficult 2020 in future years to enable companies that have not been able to afford this kind of events until now to do that. But then there are a lot of other things that I've already mentioned earlier, such as making sure that content is shipped out for translation, not only as content, but with a lot of accessory materials such as content briefs, terminology work done upstream, and this kind of things. And then finally, making sure that translators feel that they belong to the company, making sure the translators are users of the products. So in the past, if you were translating a user manual for, I don't know, a breast pump, you couldn't possibly ask a translator to be a user of the product. But now you can. And I think it's also a responsibility of the client to make sure that their providers understand their products and know how they work. In some cases, they may not be able to use some parts of the products, say an analytics portion or a business platform, because they don't necessarily have access to those, but you can create mock accounts for them, you can enable them to use the product even as kind of mock users.
Okay, thank you. Well, I can't believe it, but we've almost come to the end of this session. It's gone so quickly. Thank you for fantastic questions and for your insights. I'd like to just finish with you all giving us, let's say, one key takeaway from this session, whether it's an opportunity or something that people can take away and they can take it on. So I'd like to start with you, Norma. What's your main headline takeaway from this session?
Well, I think it's important for translators to team up with their colleagues, other translators, to build on their different skills and competences so they can offer a wide range of projects to the clients. It's almost impossible to do that on your own. So this is really important to team up with others.
Okay, thank you very much. Chiara, a one-sentence takeaway for us?
So, can you hear me, see me? Yes.
Yes.
So I guess for me, the one takeaway is let's think about cultural aspects on top of translation. Let's go beyond translation and enable translators to recreate products that resonate in their culture.
Okay, thank you. Jos, your highlight from these discussions?
I suppose I just say that the decisions we make have consequences. So from a translator's perspective, the people they choose to work with, whether they're able to specialize. There was a comment about signing their work, which of course is ideal to have it associated with you. But the decisions that they make, whether they work with someone who is going to treat them well, build a long-term trust relationship and pay well, versus someone that clearly hasn't put that much thought into the interaction. But all throughout the production network, the people who are clients, who are deciding who to get their translation done by, the people who are providing the platform, the people who are creating the technology, all of our decisions have consequences, and it's important to think about the long-term consequences and what will be best for sustainability of translation.
Okay, thank you. And last but not least, can we hear from you, Anchal? What message do you want people to take away?
Shun platforms that don't treat you well. It's the only way to get rid of them, and join those that do respect your work. We would love to welcome you at Nativy. Join us.
Okay, well, a little bit of a plug for your service. I suppose I can't blame you for that. And with that, I'd like to thank all our 4 excellent panelists for their interesting interventions and thought-provoking ideas. And I hope all of those of you who were following found the discussions stimulating and engaging. You can also catch up with Jos MOORKENS and Norma Keßler in today's virtual networking opportunity that starts at 5:45 CET. There's now going to be an hour-long break before the next session starts at 4:30. So you've got plenty of time to recharge your batteries, have a stretch, maybe look at the news headlines, and check your email. Or you can also spend it browsing some of the content on the TEF app and platform and tweeting about what you've been hearing so far using the hashtag 2020TEF. At 4:30, the discussions will revolve around EU platforms and how machine translation helps the EU connect with the public, something we actually heard a little bit about in the Commissioner's speech at the start of this forum. So until then, I'd now like to conclude by thanking you, the audience, for your concentration and for sending in so many questions. And with that, I now close this session.